Good afternoon, good morning, depending on when you're joining us from. Welcome to ABC's Trade and Investment Series, the first one this year, in partnership with the U.S. Commercial Service Office in the African Development Bank. So I will just go briefly give an overview of the housekeeping rules. So automatically your mics have been turned off, and as you've logged in, only the panelist video can be on. If you want to speak during the Q&A, please raise up your hand, signify by raising your hand. And then you can send in your questions during the Q&A section. The chat box has been disabled, so you can send in your questions in the Q&A box. And the relevant materials discussed here will be shared after the webinar. I'll be handing over to the CEO of the American Business Council, Ms. Olile. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Again, welcome on behalf of the American Business Council. Good morning or good afternoon. So on behalf of the Council and the U.S. Commercial Service of the AfDB, I would like to welcome you to the session. So this again is one of our trade and investment series. So the objective today is really to share the opportunities for U.S. companies and perhaps their partners in Nigeria, and also to highlight best case examples of projects done in Nigeria in line with the key priorities of the federal government. At this point, I'd like to introduce Janelle Weyek. There was a quiet joke we had just before this call, but I won't share that with you. So Janelle is currently serving as a senior commercial officer at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD in London. And she is also the acting senior commercial officer at the African Development Bank in Abidjan. She counsels U.S. companies on the bank's priorities in the countries, in the project countries across Eastern Europe, in Middle East and North Africa, and across the African continent for the AfDB. Obviously sharing information about new projects and initiatives and how this can be relevant for American firms, and also to help them understand the best ways to navigate this complex organizations in pursuit of their opportunities, and obviously at the end of it to win tenders. So Janelle holds an MBA and a Master's of International Management from the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul in Minnesota, and BA again from the same university. So at this point, from the University of Minnesota. So I would hand over to Janelle. Janelle, over to you.
Great, thank you, Margaret. And thank you to the American Business Council. It's such a pleasure to be back with the American Business Council in Nigeria. While it's been nearly 6 years since I departed Lagos, I keep warm memories of my time there with the ABC and of course with businesses across the country. If I might just have your attention for a moment, I'm going to try this after 6 years. Ekabo, Sanu, and Dewo. You are welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here. But since I've been in Nigeria, my role has changed. And today, I, along with my colleague Elvire Kodio, are here to talk about possible opportunities for U.S. businesses with the African Development Bank. So advanced slide, please. So first, let's talk about the Multilateral Development Banks overall. And for those of you that are familiar, this will, of course, be very basic. For those that might not have worked with the Multilateral Development Banks before, hopefully we can add some knowledge and some maybe pique your interest today. Globally, the United States is the largest combined shareholder of leading multilateral development banks, or the MDBs, including the World Bank, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and where I sit today at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Between them, MDBs have provided in excess of $50 billion in grants, loans, and guarantees to recipient countries. The U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service has liaisons at all 5 of the MDBs. And these liaisons are actually US congressionally mandated positions there to advise American businesses on how to understand the banks and engage effectively in the opportunities that it represents. So Elvire and I don't work for the MDB or for the African Development Bank. We work in the bank for the United States on behalf of American commercial interest. Next slide, please. One of the things to keep in mind about the banks is that each bank differs in geographic coverage, emphasis on public and private projects, and overall development goals. And while today we're going to be focusing on the African Development Bank, it may be worth just mentioning that, of course, the World Bank is very active in Africa as well, and in Nigeria, and we have a liaison there as well. I'm actually hoping she's listening today. And also to keep in mind that for all the MDBs, when an MDB finances a project, all the responsibility for the implementation rests with the borrower, with oversight, though, and support from that MDB. Next slide, please. So these are common benefits to US companies working with the multilateral development banks. And although each bank does differ from each other in geographic coverage, as mentioned before, and the other overall development goals, public versus private projects, these are very common across the banks. And as mentioned, these MDBs lend billions of dollars in developing countries for projects aimed at accelerating economic growth and social development by reducing poverty and inequality, improving health and education, advancing infrastructure development, and encouraging privatization, good governance, and the rule of law, all critical for US businesses. Next slide, please. In addition to the benefits we just looked at, I want to note that the procurement policies have changed at the banks in recent years, another benefit for US industry. Procurement reforms that direct borrowers to select proposals based on fit for purpose and value for money is much more effective than just picking that low-cost bid. This has been attracting high-quality bidders, including American firms, back into the fold at all the banks. Next slide, please. Doing business with any of the multilateral development banks depends on a company's ability to do business in the country where the project will be implemented, and with the borrowing government that runs the procurement process. So, as noted earlier, the U.S. commercial service liaisons at each bank help U.S. companies navigate the complex policies and processes and support U.S. industry wins of bank-financed projects. Here is just a list of some of the services that we provide. So after this webinar, please feel free to contact us for any of your questions on any of the banks. But right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Elvire Kodio. Next slide, please. So Elvire Kodio is the commercial specialist at the Commercial Service Office in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. She joined us in September of 2019, and her role is specifically to help U.S. companies interested in the African Development Bank understand the bank and its opportunities. She's been working with companies located in the United States and in any of the 54 African countries members of the AfDB. The main sectors for the bank are infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and water and sanitation. Prior to joining the commercial service, Elvire worked for 14 years in commercial banks in Canada and in Côte d'Ivoire. She holds a BA in finance from the HEC Montreal and an MBA from the University of Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada. I give you my colleague, Elvire Kodio.
Thank you very much, Janelle. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. As Janelle said, I'm Elvire Kodio, located here in Abidjan at the CS office, AfDB. So today I'll be giving you an overview of the opportunities available at the African Development Bank for US companies. The objective first was for the office to come to Nigeria. COVID happened, so that wasn't possible, but it's still okay because we're having this discussion today together. So let's start with the agenda. Joseph. All right, thank you. So we'll start with a quick introduction to the African Development Bank, and then we'll look at the opportunities for US companies. We'll also look at the steps for success. we'll see the link and how Nigeria and the African Development Bank work together. We'll look at the resources available at the African Development Bank and also see how to work with the CS AfDB, which is our office. So first, let's start with the introduction. Next slide, please. Next, please. All right, so African nations founded the AfDB back in 1964 and the US joined in 1983. So what we have to know here is that the US is the second largest shareholder after Nigeria, with almost 6% of the voting power, Nigeria having 9% of the voting power. So the AfDB's main objective is really to promote sustainable economic growth and reduce poverty on the continent. How does the bank achieve that? It's really by mobilizing and allocating resources for investment in regional member countries and providing technical assistance as well. So the bank provides assistance through two windows, the AfDB, which lends at market rates, and the ADB, which provides grants and concessional loans to the least developed countries of the continent. The bank also manages trust funds. So just to give you an idea, I have a few numbers here. In 2019, the bank approved 293 projects across the high five priorities. We'll take a look at the high fives a little later, and approved almost $7 billion in loans, equity, investment, lines of credit, and guarantees. And the ADF approved $1.6 billion in concessional loans and grants. Next slide, please. So here is an overview of the AfDB shareholding. So 81 countries, 54 African countries, those are the regional member countries, 27 non-African countries, the non-regional members of which the United States. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have the high five priorities. So these are really the priority areas where the bank works. It's aligned with the main sectors where the bank has activities, which is energy, agriculture, industrialization, infrastructure, and human capital. What we really have to know about this here is that it's aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and it's also linked to African Union's Agenda 2063. The bank will never approve a loan or go forward with any activity that does not align with the high five priorities here. So it's extremely important to the bank and also to African countries. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide here is basically to give you an idea of the portfolio in 2019. So what you notice here is that transport, 25%, energy, 22%, finance, 19%, and agriculture, 11% are the largest sector where the bank actually has activities. Next slide, please. So what are the opportunities for US companies? Next, please. Three types of opportunities. So first, we have the project procurement. African governments actually lend money from the African development banks and are responsible for public competition and to select vendors as well. So as I said, the country borrows money and then runs the competition, and then firms, companies can actually bid on projects available on the procurement notices. We also have the corporate procurements. So the AfDB itself runs competition for services and goods. That's for internal needs. And we have the private sector operations. So that's US and AfDB member countries, firms coming to the bank with projects for which they need financing and also other type of solutions. Next, please. All right, so here I chose to show you this project here. It's a publicly financed project. So again, that's a project where the bank financed Nigeria, and then Nigeria was responsible for putting everything in place. So it was the bank's commitment for this project was $41 million, and it's in transport. So it's the Ebonyi State Ring Road project. You can see here, you probably know about it, and you can see here the procurement needs that were that came with that project that's actually still in implementation. Next slide, please. So here, the private sector activities. What we really have to remember about the private sector opportunities at the African Development Bank is that the bank on those projects acts as a co-financier. The objective here for the bank is really to develop the African private sector. The project must be based, of course, on the continent, and the company must be from one of the AfDB member countries, regional or non-regional member countries. So you have here the eligibility criteria. Actually, we have more than that, but I chose to give you these ones here. The company must be incorporated in a member country. Majority owned by private sector. Project must be commercially viable. The sponsor must be in good standing with the bank. And the maximum participation from the bank with private sector is 33% for a minimum of $10 million that the bank can actually inject in the project. So the project is being selected based on 4 main criteria. The first one is strategic alignment, the development outcomes that we have to look at, commercial viability, and also additionality. Next slide, please. So here, we really chose to focus on the energy sector. As you all know, energy is really, really big at the AfDB, especially this year, where it's one of the main areas where the bank wants to focus. So in Nigeria, what we have to know about energy is that there's a huge power deficit that constrains economic activity and livelihoods. That's the results of years of underinvestment in that sector. So the power access rate is estimated at 45%, which is really, really low, unfortunately. And Nigeria, what we have to know is that Nigeria has an immense potential on energy resources like solar, wind, or hydroelectricity. So the AfDB Energy Department role is really to provide financing solutions and technical assistance. So here, what you have here are the financing solutions that are being offered by the energy sector at the AfDB. You have lending guarantees, you have equity with a ceiling of 25% ownership by the bank, and you also have trust funds. So I didn't go in detail because it's really today what we're doing is really to have an overview, as I mentioned before, but documents and information are available on this here. Can we have the next slide, please? So now, what are the steps for success? From our experience here at the office, we've noticed that companies that have the most success actually perform these 3 things simultaneously. They have experience in Africa. They have local partners. They have relationships here with key government and private sector actors. They also develop relationships with the bank. Events that the bank organizes, the AIF, the BOS, they come. Well, before COVID, they used to come, but now that it's virtual, they participate in the events. And they also do visit and have meetings with people, staff at the AfDB. And finally, they bid on projects. They do have to do the groundwork to find project information, go on the website, understand the procurement procedures. That's really, really important. Next slide, please. Next, please. Joseph? All right, thank you. Okay, so what we usually advise our customers, what we advise our customers is really to do the work, as I mentioned before. You have to know your market, you have to know your clients. You also have to have a strategy that you will execute. And if you don't win, and if you bid and you don't win, you have to ask for a debrief and bid again. Here I have a few questions, I have a list of questions that we usually suggest our clients and companies that are interested in the AfDB to ask themselves. Has my company worked in Africa before? Really, really important. Do we have experienced local partner with whom we can bid? Has my company worked on MDB project before with other banks? Do we have experience with project financing? Are we able to inject the financial and human resources to follow project for several years? Because it can take very, very long. Do we specialize in infrastructure, transportation, energy, which are the big sectors at the bank? What expertise and best practices from other regions can we actually bring to the continent? So those are questions that we really encourage companies to ask themselves. Sometimes it happens that companies are too small to actually pursue tenders at the bank. So for those small companies that don't have the capacity to do that, we usually suggest them to look at the contract award notices and contact winners, try to be their suppliers and subcontractors. Those are options that are available for smaller companies. Next slide, please. So Nigeria and the AfDB. Here, what we have here actually comes from what we call the country strategy paper. So each country has what we call the strategy paper. It's all available on the bank's website. So this here comes from the one from Nigeria that was actually developed for a period of 4 years from 20 to 24. So the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and challenges of Nigeria, I'm sure you all know about it. Nigeria is the largest African economy with, and it's a major oil and gas producer in Africa, actually the 4th globally. There's a lot of untapped opportunities in agriculture, renewable energy, we mentioned it before. The weaknesses, the high dependence on oil revenue, 90% of exports, physical infrastructure deficits, and the challenges, rapid population growth, insecurity, fueled by Boko Haram. Next slide, please. So now, those 2 priority areas were identified in the country strategy paper for 2020-2024. The first one is to support the infrastructure development in the country, and the second one is to promote social inclusion through agribusiness skills development. Next slide, please. So at the end of every country strategy paper, we have what we call the Indicative Operations Program. It is a list of projects that will be executed during the period in the country. For Nigeria, we have a total of 45 projects that were identified for that period. $4 billion for 4 years in lending and $5 million in grants. So here I selected 10 projects, 5 in the first area of emphasis for the bank. It's infrastructure development, and 5 in social inclusion. So that's all information, as I mentioned before, that's available publicly on the website, and it's available on Nigeria's page. So companies that are interested can actually go and look for those projects. Next slide, please. So the AfDB has an office in Nigeria. Here's information about that office. I really suggest to first, for companies that are interested in the bank, to first contact our office here. But here's information from the AfDB Nigeria country office. Okay, so now we'll go over the resources that are available we'll go over the resources that are available. The first one is the country page. If we can come back to the, perfect. So the country page, every country has a page on the African Development Bank's website. It gives information, a lot of information about that country, including the country strategy paper. So here's the one for Nigeria. If you can have the next slide, please. You also have project information here. Next slide, please. You have consultancy services. So the system here that we see, the DACON system, is the platform where companies can go actually and register for consultancy services. Next slide, please. So we have what I like a lot, and something that I really do work a lot with is the data portal that has information about all the projects that were ever approved by the AfDB, put in place by the AfDB, by country, by region, by sector and industry. So we have a lot of information available on that page here, the data portal. Next slide, please. We have what we call the quarterly operations summary. It's information about upcoming projects. So that's something that can be considered as the pipeline for projects at the African Development Banks. That company go really a lot to consult, because you have information about project coming up in every country for the following 6 months after the publication of the summary. Next, please. So important links here, the general procurement notices, the specific procurement notices, and the UN business developments. Next, please. So working with our office, CS AfDB. So we have what we call the Guide to Doing Business with Multilateral Development Banks. That's a guide that was developed by the International Trade Administration. That's available on our website, and it's really to give information to companies that are interested by the MDBs on how to really go ahead with working with those type of banks. You have the website for the African Development Bank that we mentioned before that has a lot of information, and you can also contact us for a meeting and one of our tailored services. So here's information about the office. Janelle, that you already know, and myself, we are available. You have the phone numbers, you have the email addresses, so you can send us an email or call us and we'll give you information as needed. Thank you very much. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elvire. So we're going straight into the Q&A session. We already have a question from Rufus. Let me open that up. Okay, so Rufus Andrew asks, what about telecommunications broadband infrastructure? Doesn't seem to feature in your list of priorities.
You know, it wasn't mentioned. It's sure a sector and industry where the bank works as well. We couldn't mention everything. We just really went with what are the biggest one. You know, the African Development Bank is considered an infrastructure bank because the needs are really immense in Africa for everything that's infrastructure. But the bank actually also works in telecommunication. So how we really go about that with other companies is based on the needs that the company has, based on the sector and the industry where the company works. We actually can put them in contact with people at the bank that are responsible for the project that they're bringing to the bank or their sector and industry. So yes, the bank works in telecom, and if the person asking is interested in talking to people and connecting with people and having more information, we're available here to direct them to that information about telecom in the African Development Bank.
Okay, perfect. Just to reiterate, thanks, Elvire. Just to reiterate to our participants, you can send in your questions in the Q&A function, or if you want to speak, please indicate by raising your hands up so that we could unmute you. Okay. Okay. Okay, so Haruna Nura would like to speak, so I'll be unmuting you in a second. Hello, Nura. Okay. Nura, can you hear us? Okay, since she's having issues. Okay, let me check the. Okay, I think that you've answered the first question and you responded. Let me see if we have another question there. Okay, so no question from the Q&A box. Let's see. Just to reiterate again, if you have a question, please use the Q&A box or indicate by raising your hands.
Joseph, do we have questions in the chat that maybe aren't showing? I know it can get a little confusing sometimes, especially if someone's on their phone.
Oh yeah. So the chat has been disabled, just the Q&A function. Yeah.
While we're waiting for questions in the Q&A or people to connect in and unmute, what I was going to suggest is, Elvire, maybe talk about some of the benefits that we've had introducing U.S. companies into the regional offices or the individual country offices, as opposed to the headquarters in Abidjan. I think that insight might be very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've introduced, so how it works is really depending on the company that comes and the need that the company has, we can either go with a strategy by sector or by region. And we've come to realize that it's really it's really helpful to the company and to us and to the bank as well to also go by region, because usually companies know where they want to work, they know what they want to do, what they want to offer to which region and to which company. And lately the bank has gone with a new strategy of decentralizing, opening regional offices and country offices everywhere in the continent, just to be closer to be on the field, to be closer to the clients. So what we've done lately is really to directly introduce the company to the regional offices instead of going to the headquarters here in Abidjan, because in the headquarters sometimes in certain departments, it's really the overall strategy that's being put in place, where in the countries and the regions, they go more specifically on the needs of the country, the needs of the region, the resources that they're gonna need, the project that will be financed and everything. So we found that it's become better and more beneficial for our companies to really go to a regional, a more specific type of strategy, just to really target where they want to work in Africa. Because Africa, you know what, Africa is so large, we all know that, and the markets are so different from north to south, west, east. So it's really, really extremely important for the companies to try to target the region and the country where they want to work based on what they have to offer. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Olukunle Akombi, the pharmaceutical sector is an untapped opportunity area in Nigeria. Is the AfDB looking at this sector in the nearest future? The sector is currently not well organized, and I believe that AfDB and US can bring in more of the expertise and support.
Sorry, I didn't hear which sector, Joseph.
Pharmaceutical sector.
Pharmaceutical, yeah. So it's true. The pharmaceutical and healthcare sector is, I would say, untapped, but the AfDB is really aware of that. In the last business opportunity seminar it was actually last month in April, the representatives from that department, the healthcare, mentioned that they're putting a strategy in place to really emphasize on the infrastructure, the pharmaceutical and healthcare infrastructure in Africa. So they're very much aware of the potential and the needs that are available in Africa for that sector. So the bank is really working towards that. The strategy is being put in place. I actually inquired because I have pharmaceutical companies asking me about it, interested in it, US companies that want to work in Africa in that sector. So I'm in contact with people over at that department, the healthcare and pharmaceutical, and we'll be aware of when that program will be started, kicked off, and we'll keep our companies informed, because as I told you, the bank is really aware of the needs and the potential, and they're really, really working to bridge that gap in that sector.
And Elvire, if I might just add a bit to what you've just said. This was a very interesting conversation that Elvire and I had with the new head of a group of sectors, including the healthcare and pharmaceutical sector recently. And they're very open to having more, I guess we'd say, strategic conversations earlier in the process. And as I think everyone would agree on this webinar, the earlier you can engage and start to talk about some of the things that are needed, your experience in development, your experience in bringing this expertise as US companies to a country or to a region is very much appreciated and valued, I think, by the bank. And the earlier in your process that you're ready to do that, I think it's the time to contact Elvire and I and see if we can set up a technical briefing. And you'll notice that I use the terms technical briefing. I did not use the term marketing pitch. And that's very, very specific, because this is the kind of experience, best practices, give and take that I think is so valuable. It helps the thinking of the bank and how they're moving forward and developing, or in the case of some sectors, renewing their strategies, because the strategies are going out so many years, sort of coming in the middle. You need to kind of make sure you look at and say, okay, where does my company's value proposition and what I have to offer sort of fit into what's already the objective? And can I be looking at opportunities, whether it's in the public sector or whether you're looking for to supplement some private sector financing with local partners or something that you're doing. So this is not new information to say you should come early, but we're here to suggest that we're here to help you do that and to answer these exact kinds of questions. Where are they with my sector right now? Where are they thinking? We focused on power for obvious reasons, but happy to take questions on really any sector. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, one question from Nura Haruna. Please, what efforts are you making to improve education in Nigeria? So I think to rephrase, maybe Nura is asking what kinds of projects is the AfDB doing in the educational space?
Yeah. Actually, education is one of the priorities in Nigeria. As we mentioned, let me just go back to that slide there. As we mentioned, the social inclusion is one of the main focuses of the bank. It has been since last year. It's ongoing until 2024. So in that is included education. So you're going to have project building schools, you're going to have centers being built for the youth. So it's really something that the AfDB is aware of. Fortunately, the Nigerian government is also aware of that. So they're really working together to actually work in that sector of education. Education also is one of the sectors where the bank knows they have to work and really bridge those gaps that they have. They haven't been as active in education as they've been in other sectors. So the bank is really working not only in Nigeria, but in almost all of African countries to really go to the youth and provide them with everything that they need for their education. So yes, the bank is working towards that. It's one of the great priorities in Nigeria. And if you go and look at the country strategy paper, you'll see the projects that are available for those 4 years in education. And you'll see that they're really aware of that and they're really working in that sector as well.
Okay, perfect. I don't know if for me, okay, we don't have any question at the moment. From my end, I would like to maybe you could give an overview of the kinds of ICT projects the AfDB is involved in, because I know there's critical interest in Nigeria in the broadband space and telecom space, both of them actually. So we see the likes of Facebook in Africa trying to build some, invest in that space as well, Microsoft. But it would be helpful to if you could just highlight or share more insights on that from the AfDB.
Yeah. So the AfDB is also, as you mentioned, working on the ICT space. Unfortunately, I don't have with me here the exact numbers. I don't have the exact projects that are being put in place in that specific sector, because there are so many sectors that they work in. But I know for sure where to find the information on the website. The bank works in that sector. As I mentioned before, it's not, they have their big sectors where they've historically worked, and they're also trying to switch that and to work a little more on those sectors that have been not as well looked at and not as well developed as the traditional infrastructure, transport, agriculture, water, and everything. So those new technologies and these education and healthcare, pharmaceuticals, this is all something that the bank is really trying to work towards. And yes, you won't see ICT in the list of priorities, unfortunately, maybe, but that doesn't mean that the bank is not working in that space. Especially it's ICT is something that can be found everywhere. I mean, you can have agriculture project and have procurement in ICT. You can have an energy project and have procurement in ICT as well. So that's something that's really, maybe that's why the bank isn't focusing on it as much, because it's everywhere. in all the sectors and the industries where we work, because it's something that we can't actually work without. So yes, the AfDB works in ICT. It's just we would have to look for the specific list of projects and procurement notices available for that. But you won't see that as a priority for the bank, even though they're present in that space.
Yeah, and then actually, Elvire's right. This is the way it's been working and headed in the direction, in some cases, with the different multilateral development banks for some time. Others are sort of catching up over the last year. At where I'm sitting at EBRD, a brand new digital strategy was launched last fall, replacing the old ICT strategy for exactly the reason that Elvire is referring to, is that the focus is on digitization and understanding where each of the recipient countries are, and then their strategies might not be updated. The country strategy might not be updated this year, but be aware that they are working on that as a priority, really, in all the banks, and it's different. And that's why, you know, having a chance to have an individual company counseling session with Elvire and I, or separately Elvire or me, whatever works for you. We can actually, if you understand your objectives and your services and value proposition, where you're interested, we can start to put together a more customized counseling session for you, not dissimilar to what you would have with our sister office in Lagos in the FCS, very similar. But with regard to ICT digitization, it is definitely an emphasis across the MDBs. It won't surprise you to hear, I think, that climate and green are also going to be much stronger at the African Development Bank. Yes, indeed, also at the EBRD. And so I think you'll start to see more on that if your solutions tie into that broad theme, which can really impact a lot of sectors, not the least of which, of course, is energy. And that will continue to be, as Elvire has already mentioned, a key factor for what you'll see on the headlines, of course, of AfDB. I don't know, Elvire, if you wanted to say any more about that, but I wanted to emphasize these broader themes can touch your business, even if you don't see the headlines.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so you just made mention of my follow-up question. Climate change initiatives, especially coming from the U.S. government and the EU, US being a large shareholder in the AfDB, or a shareholder in the AfDB. It would be great to just, if private sector could have a sense of what the positioning is, because there's this all over the news, the press release from the White House and various institutions as well on doubling down on climate change initiatives and financing as well, and cutting down on funding for oil and gas, right? So it would just be great if you could share where AfDB is at this point, because Africa can, at this point, can't automatically leapfrog into huge climate change projects, right? It has to be done gradually. But if you just share that, yeah, sure.
Yeah, as Janelle mentions, climate change will be one of the priorities for Africa, because at this point we can't ignore the problems that are here in Africa. I have a few numbers here. So Africa accounts for less than 4% of world's gas emissions, yet 4 out of 5 world's most vulnerable countries are in Africa. So less than 3% of global climate finance flows to Africa. So those are the numbers that we have. So the bank is very much aware of the situation. So Africa needs $50 billion per year to adapt to climate change. So what the bank is doing for that is really, it's improving the capacity to predict and issue effective early warning alerts, fostering innovation to manage emerging climate threats, strengthening governance, effective policies and institutions, and mobilizing global climate finance. So this is something that the bank is taking really, really seriously, because Africa's, as you heard from the numbers that I just mentioned, Africa's really been impacted by climate change. So they're working, you'll hear more about it, you'll have more projects about it, and the bank will communicate more about what's being done in that area.
Okay, perfect. Just checking if we have.
Yeah, I would like to just share some thoughts. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Just yeah, you talked about, Janelle talked about the opportunities for specific sector conversations. I think that's a real great idea, and I think that could be one of the moving forward from this meeting. So we could have the sector labs that could speak specifically to different groups that are keen to understand a lot more as it impacts the sector. So I think that it's a great idea, and I would like that, that we run that as a moving forward partnership on with AfDB and with Elvire and Janelle.
All right.
Joseph,
Okay.
any more questions?
Yeah. I'm checking the Q&A.
Okay.
While Joseph is still checking, what has the success rate been, in terms of people who reach out to you directly for this project, in terms of the tenders that you see? And how are people able to see the tenders? Again, these are things that we could also discuss, because we could actually support by putting some of those tender updates on our platforms, so that.
Elvire, would you like me to
Yeah.
take the front end of that and then pass it to you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think that this is a question the front end question is, what's the success rate? We get this question a lot from all over, and we are limited in some respects to the data that's available to us. But we've done a fair amount of data analysis really at all the banks, including the African Development Bank. And on the face of it, it looks like the numbers are small. But one of the things that we do see is when US companies bid, they tend to win more often. And so when you've seen in the slides where we say, one of the key factors of success is actually bidding, because then we've seen that in the data. From here, very specifically to the African Development Bank, I'm going to let Elvire take over, because I know she's got some very specific thoughts on the rest of your question.
Yeah. So what Janelle said is absolutely right. Companies need to bid, and that's why we mentioned that point in the presentation. When they bid, they have a much higher success rate. So what we do here is not only help companies win, but it's really to educate companies about the African Development Bank. Not all companies are ready to work with MDBs. Not all companies are ready to work in Africa. So it's really, really to help them better understand the continent, the bank, the opportunities, and advise them on the best ways to actually go about working in African countries and working with the bank. So procurement alerts are available on the website. You have the general procurement notices, the specific procurement notices. Companies can actually get emails periodically about new procurements that are coming up on the website. But it's really, for our office here, is really to help US companies with all of their questions, all the aspects of them working on the continent and on specifically with the African Development Bank, asking questions, helping them get a foot on in the bank, attending events, meeting with people, talking to people, getting to know how it works, the procurement notices, procurement policies, and everything. So that's really where we're here to help the companies, and they have to do the work as well. We also advise them to really do the work, do research, come to, well, these days it's a little bit harder for companies to come, but historically we've ask them to come to the continent to meet, because it's different from one market to another, one MDB to another. Here in Africa, you have to be here, you have to be on the continent, you have to meet with people and talk to them. So it's really, really what our office is working towards. And we've had success educating companies, educating US companies, and telling them about what the opportunities are here in Africa.
One of the things, in answer to your question a little bit further, is when you get the slide deck from Joseph after the webinar, I would refer you to slides 30, 31, and 32. And for a couple of reasons. We went through them kind of fast, but there are alerts, as Elvire said, but I want to urge people to not just look at the project tenders. As you know, sometimes if you're not already involved in a country and already sort of have done your business development with the relevant government decision-making bodies, getting in there early and really doing that business development is so critical. And sometimes by the time you see a tender, there may be opportunity to bid and be successful, but it may be a little late in the process. And so on slide 32, I guess it is, the data portal that Elvire mentioned when she was giving her presentation, this is the pipeline. And so this may give you a little earlier indication of what's going on in your countries of interest, where you might say, look, I'm already kind of working in that country, or I have a good partner in that country, or I have the kind of expertise, but you're getting in ahead of the sort of ahead of the game, if you will, before it actually hits. And the bank's project leads are generally open to talking about a particular project before the tender is published. Once it's published, they pretty much can only talk about the procurement process. So it's a really good opportunity to look at these and get those alerts in your inbox for those early, the early information on what's coming up and what's coming up in the pipeline. So those are some things that you can, kind of get a little bit of training for your team to look at or something, so they can get that in themselves as well. Joseph, I do see a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, I do. Will the U.S. company work directly or in partnership with local companies?
I didn't hear, sorry.
Yeah, so will the U.S. company work directly or in partnership with local companies?
Yeah.
For a bid,
Yeah.
for a tender?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Yeah, U.S. companies work. It happens really, really often actually that U.S. companies work in partnership with local companies here. For private sector projects, even for public tenders, it happens often. But again, you have to have the right, you have to find the right partner. You have to know your partner, its activities. Like, you really have to do the due diligence before picking a partner with whom you will be working. So yes, it's one of the strategies that we actually advise to our clients to take. But you really have to know your partner, and the advantage of that is that when you have a local partner, they know the market maybe a little better. They have experience, which is absolutely critical to success here on the continent. So yeah, it happens very often. It's actually something that's suggested, even though it's not mandatory, because US companies can come to Africa and work with the AfDB alone, because as we mentioned before, and as you all know, that the US is part of the shareholding of the bank, so US companies can work alone. But it happens very often that they have local partners, that they actually work with. Yes.
Okay. All right, so there are no questions, and we're coming to the end of the program. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elvire. Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.
Thank you to our participants for taking our time to listen in and ask their questions. The next steps, what we're doing, we'll share the slides and the contact details of the presenters. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Lily, as well. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.